Training Course, Pollution and Health. Module 1, The Hospital Wastes, Their Impact and Management. Hello, we are going to speak about the hospital wastes, particularly their impact and management. This is the second part of the lesson, and I'm Emilio Benfinati, the head of the Department of Environmental Health Sciences of the Institute for Pharmacological Research Mario Negri, Milan, Italy. The main topic of this lesson regards the impact of the hospital waste, pharmaceuticals in particular, and their impact in the environment. We will give some examples related to the Italian situation, a couple of cases. And we will also talk about the strategies to minimize the impact of the pharmaceutical. Lesson 1.2, The Impact of Hospital Waste and Pharmaceuticals in the Environment, Italian Examples, Strategies. The first example relates the environmental risk assessment of the contaminants within a river in Italy, which is called Lidra River. This study has been published. And the strategy, the approach for this, regards of course, both of the site information. So, we need information specific for the scenario of the river, in particular, the presence of treatment plants, industry, and cities. But also, we need information regarding the literature and the environmental fate and transport of the contaminants. On the other side, we also need information regarding the toxicological efforts both for the ecological part and for the human risk assessment. And at this point, we can then combine and integrate all the results which derive from the scenario from the specific site and from the toxicity of the pollutants that we have identified. So, in this study, we collected samples from 15 different locations along the river, and you see that the concentration of the pollutants, very largely depending on the site, some are much more contaminated than others. When we have to evaluate and now, we focus, for instance, the ecotoxicity, we have to identify the efforts of the hazard for the, particularly. We are interested in the regulation it's mainly dealing with aquatic toxicity. So, we refer to 3 trophic levels, so fish, algae, and Daphnia. And the data derives from the literature, so environmental studies, which are experimental studies. If this piece of information is not available, we can also use in silicon mode. So values which are predicted using computer tools or values on similar compounds. And what is more interesting is the chronic catheter because we can imagine that this kind of pollution will last for years. And so, what will happen to a fish after a prolonged exposure, and actually, what is more important is the predicted no-effect concentration. So, we should try to understand, which is the safe level of the contamination. Once we know the safe level, the PNEC predicted no environmental concentration, we can compare this value with the measured concentration in the river. Or we can also use the predicted environmental concentration, which comes from modeling the pollutants along the river. So, we can check if the concentration of a certain chemical, present in the river, exceeds the safe level. Of course, if we have this excess to match pollutants in the river, this is something that we don't want because we can imagine that the fish or the living organism will have a risk. So, in this case, we have developed, let's say a kind of scenario ranging from a situation where the concentration is quite low, far from the effort of concern. While in other cases, we can imagine that the concentration is very high, if there are many contaminants exceeding this threshold value, we will have a very critical level. Ideally, we should be on the safe side. So, we should have the concentration of all the individuals and aggregate the contaminants below the value of effect, below the value of 1. So, all of this absolutely has to be avoided. This is the map of a river, Lidra River, and this is the Tagliamento is another river. Inside of the Tagliamento here you can see Gemona del Friuli, Asopo, and you can see the sampling sites. And there are also wastewater treatment plants, there are factories, and these are the colors that we have introduced. So ideally, we should have blue, green cases, yellow are just the borderline. But we can also see that close to wastewater treatment plants, we have a situation with a high concentration of contaminants, of pollutants, and this absolutely is something bad that should not occur. What we've seen is the pollutants of the pharmaceutical, which are present in the river surface water. But we have also investigated the pharmaceutical present in solid material in sludge of the wastewater and treatment plant as two kind. The main kind of material generated the liquid part and the solid part of the sludge, which indeed, this is a sample of analysis that we have done, and we can see that for some contaminants, for some pharmaceutical, the concentration is maybe 1 microgram per gram, so 1000 nanogram, and these are regards in particular antibiotics, analgesic, and antibiotic substance. The sludge in Lombardy, for example, the use of sludge from wastewater and treatment plants in Lombardy, and it is applied in different ways, through injection or ploughing or dispersion. And we have analyzed not only the sludge, but also the presence of pharmaceuticals and contaminants in the soil after treatment, let's say. This is the map of Lombardy. You can see all the municipalities. This is Milan, and in particular, if the use of a sludge is forbidden. These are the red municipalities. So, in most of Lombardy, you can use the application of sludge, it is possible. And so, considering the analysis that we have done on the sludge and on the soil, we have, let's say, modeled what kind of contamination we can get for one of the pharmaceuticals that we have found in the slides. Particularly, this pharmaceutical, which is an antibiotic, ciprofloxacin. We have already discussed that antibiotics represent an issue because it can generate antibiotic resistance. And so, these are the different municipalities that we have mapped considering the soil characteristics. And in this case, we have seen it is forbidden to use sludge. In other cases, it is not forbidden. And so, we can easily exceed the threshold of 0.1 microgram per liter, which is the threshold value for pesticides in the water. And so, as you can see, in most of cases, we can imagine that using the sludge can generate a concentration of pharmaceutical antibiotics in this case, which indeed has been measured in the sludge, and then there may be a migration. This has been modeled considering physical, chemical, and environmental properties of the substance from the soil to the groundwater. Now, how to manage, how to avoid this kind of situation? We have to of course take into consideration as much as possible, suitable proper treatment of the waste for internal disregarded, drugs expired, drug sewages of the human samples. We should improve the treatment plants. In some cases, they are not very effective in the abatement of pharmaceutical compounds. And the antibiotic is an issue because several of these plants, they have a biological treatment and use bacteria and of course antibiotics. It's something that destroys the system if the concentration is too high. We have to evaluate the process of the sludge, and we have to make the analysis to check what kind of contaminant pollutants we have in the sludge. And we have seen that the impact depends on the circumstances of the soil composition, and also, the river depends on the scenario, in practice. As much as possible, try to avoid waste. So, this is the very first lesson, which means the proper use with those, with the treatment, probably not in the hospital, but in the case of a common pills and drugs for people there's a lot of possibility to improve this. For consider that the antibiotic treatment, maybe lasts 6 days, 2 pieces per day, so you need to have pills. The package is 10 pills, so you have to buy 2 packages, and so you have waste. You generate the waste, simply because the package or it is not so common in Italy to go to the drugstore and buy exactly 12 pills because, I need 12 pills, I do not need 20 pills, and so, minimize the spread once you have the waste. This is another necessary procedure, and the survey, what kind of waste each hospital generates, each municipality, each plant generates. We have to know if we want to intervene and plan remediation. We have to train the personnel, and we have to define a scheme, a virtuous process to minimize the waste. Thank you for your attention.